Hey guys, I'm Prodigy from Airsoft Team Kilo23. Today we're checking out something you might not see very often. This is the Taurus Complete Gearbox by Modify. I've worked on a couple of these in the past. I've never had a complete one. Usually these are actually very hard to find right now. I've looked on a lot of the major retailers' websites and no one really carries the complete gearbox. Most of the time it's just the standard gearbox shell, some of the Taurus specific parts like the tappet plate maybe, never the complete gearbox, so I'm really excited to check this thing out today. We're going to open this up, look at all the parts, I'll tell you what I think about everything, then I'm going to show you how to briefly install it in a gun. So the gun I'm going to throw the gearbox in today is the Echo 1 SOG 68. Now if you remember, I did review this pretty recently actually. So this is a cool little gun, we're going to throw a really cool gearbox in it, and it's just going to be that awesome. So let's get down to the gearbox. So technically this is a high-speed gearbox. It does have 16:1 gears, an M100 spring, a ported cylinder for an M4, and it is front wired as well. Keep in mind this is a version 2 gearbox, so it only fits in M4s specifically. You can modify it with a different selector plate and nozzle and a slightly different wiring configuration to fit in an MP5 or similar version 2 gearbox guns. Now Modify in all their wisdom have included heat shrink and a Dean's adapter. That's pretty awesome. The gearbox does not come with the connector installed, it only comes with the Dean's connector, so you do have to solder this on and install it yourself. Now something I really wish Modify would have done is actually include some quick disconnects with this. What I mean is most front wire guns actually have little quick disconnect connectors that sit there. That way you can easily disconnect it, take your gearbox out, etc. With this design you actually have to desolder your connector every time or install your own quick disconnects. Now, just taking a first look at this gearbox out of the box, it is pretty robust and solid. Now, Modify says this is actually stronger than the KW8 gearbox. Just the reinforcement on it is a little different, very different design. I've personally never seen one of these break, while I have seen KW8 gearboxes break. That says something. KWAs, I always thought were the strongest gearbox shell you could get, till this came along. Now, having opened the gearbox, the first thing I noticed is that there is no grease in this gearbox. The piston head O-ring has very, very thin grease on it, but it's really not enough. Now, with the gearbox disassembled, let's pull everything out, check it out in detail. The spring is a non-linear SP100 power. Portions of it have a non-linear design where it is a little more tightly coiled. The spring guide is all metal, has bearings, and it feels very solid. Next up, the cylinder head, piston head, tappet plate, and nozzle. Now without a doubt this gearbox does have quite a bit of color in it. First let's check out the random components here. Tappet plate is up first. It's extremely flexible, I'm kind of surprised. Interesting yellow color. It does have these two slits here in the front. This makes it a somewhat proprietary item. You can modify other tappet plates if this one breaks. These are a little difficult to find if you want this specific tappet plate. These cuts here do fit into grooves in the gearbox. The grooves run along the inside of the gearbox, just under the cylinder. The nozzle is a polycarb design, has an O-ring on the inside for increased air seal. Fits pretty snugly on the cylinder head also. The cylinder and cylinder head are both made out of aluminum, so it's just kind of nice. They're both pretty light. When you get these steel cylinder heads, they can be pretty heavy and they can damage your gearbox shell. Aluminum being lighter can help. Does have a rubber damper here. It might be a little thin for the angle of engagement, but we'll check that out in a bit. Has two O-rings, which is very nice. Fits very snugly in the cylinder as well. The cylinder itself, also made out of aluminum. Rib design. It's a Type 2 cylinder, so it has the port here for an M4 length barrel, which is about 360 millimeters. The piston and piston head are also very light. Black piston head, ported of course. One O-ring. And you can see the bearings in there. That is kind of nice having a clear piston so you can actually really see the bearings in there instead of having to look in the back. The piston does have these speed rails here. Helps get grease integrated in there when you put it in. Has one metal tooth and is a really light polycarb design. Notice the second to last tooth has not been removed. Chances are I will have to correct the angle of engagement, so I will have to shave that down. Now let's see how good the air seal is. Wow. Actually has a perfect air seal. When you see it bounces back like this, it's excellent, if not perfect. Next up, let's check out the gear set and the anti-reversal latch. These are some very interesting components of this gearbox that are very unique. The anti-reversal latch here has a small flathead groove on the top. This makes it so you don't have to, when you're trying to release it, stick a little hook device up inside of the motor hole here. You can actually just take a small flat head, twist it, and release the tension on your spring. It's a very nice little feature. The anti-reverse latch actually has a C-clip on the bottom here which holds the spring in place. Another really cool feature. Now, the gear set is what's called a modular gear set. They are technically pre-shimmed, they are just one unit, so you don't have to shim each gear when you put them in a new gearbox every time. It's kind of a cool feature. It makes it very easy for new players to actually install different sets of gears. Now, I know when I started, shimming was probably the most difficult thing. It's the one thing I get the most questions about, just about anywhere I go. How do you shim this? What do I do with the bevel gear? This and that. This makes it essentially a lot easier. Now let's check out the gear set itself in greater detail. It does have a little bit of that thinner grease on it, so it is a little difficult to keep a hold of. The gears spin alright, but they're not the fastest, smoothest spinning gears. Now, one thing I noticed right when I took these out, there is a lot of axial play there. That is really not the greatest thing in the world. This gear set is great for beginners just because you can drop it in, but for advanced players, you might want to just shim your own gearbox, to be honest. I noticed there is a lot of height there between the two gears. That might be something to check out. Now, I have had these gear sets in the past. I've had no problems with teeth breaking or anything like that, so these are extremely durable still, even though they don't look quite the part. Now, the gearbox shell itself is 8mm, so therefore any 8mm bushing, bearing, whatever you want will fit in here. But what it comes with is these proprietary bushings. They're only going to fit the modular gear set. Now, you will have to buy new bushings if you want to get new gears for this gearbox. Not a big deal. But these make it super easy to swap out the different modular gear sets. So if you want to go from the 16.1 that's already in here to the 18.1 or even something super torquey like 32.1, you'd be able to do that really, really fast. Now let's go ahead and take a closer look at the gearbox shell itself. The shell does have the ribbing design along the side, kind of an interesting little effect. You've got all these little grooves in here to really see what's going on in the gearbox without having to open it up. It makes it really easy to lubricate your gears, see if there's a broken tooth, something jammed in there, all kinds of cool things. So it's a really nice touch of them putting that in there. And of course, you get the Modify logo right on the side of it. Now let's check out the electrical system and let's start with the wiring. A nice little touch I did see here was some heat shrink on some places where your wiring might get a little ripped. Now in the past I've bought some wire sets from other companies that the links on these wires weren't the greatest. I usually want the black wire here past the gearbox to be about 110mm, and the red wire to be about 130mm. These are just about dead on to the lengths you really need for them to fit well in your pistol grip. And here's a little bit more heat shrink to make it easier to install it and keep it well maintained in your gun. Now the trigger switch itself is virtually identical to other version 2 trigger switches, except that both the solder points are right next to each other. It's kind of a cool little touch. It makes it a little easier to work with the gearbox. Now looking at the trigger assembly itself, the trigger shuttle, the guy on top there that's moving, looks to contact the trigger sears very, very nicely. You should not have a problem running a LiPo on this gearbox for quite a while. Alright, now the interesting part of actually installing the gearbox into a gun. Because the SOG 68's design is a little different and has a one-piece hop-up, you do have to kind of do things a little bit differently. Brian from Echo 1 has a great video on how this differs from a standard M4 that Echo 1 makes. So I'm going to be installing this in the SOG 68 today. It is going to be a little different, so just bear with me. I'm going to start by sliding the gearbox into the upper. Now I'm going to pull the hop-up out a little bit now so we can actually fit the wires through the hole in the front here. Now, both of these are actually silver cord, so you can't really tell which one's the red wire, which one's the black wire, without a little bit of difficulty. Modify actually puts a little bit of heat shrink on the black wire, just to let you know, hey, this is the negative wire, don't mix it up. First thing we're going to do is feed the wires for the pistol grip hole here. Line this all up. It can be a little tricky. Alright, with everything lined up pretty well, we can go ahead and start putting our pins in. We're going to have 3 at the moment. This pin that goes right in the middle, and the 2 body pins here. Next, I'll go ahead and install the pistol grip on here, so we'll need the grip itself, and the 2 screws here. Now we're going to reinstall the motor. please realize that both of these wires always sit behind the motor. The red one never goes in front. This one should always wrap around the back of the motor and then connect in the front. And with that, we have the motor in. You actually have to either take some needle nose, or you can do this by hand. You actually have to bend these connectors and fit them over the connection points on the motor. After that is accomplished, you can go ahead and put your motor plate back on, just the motor plate and the 2 screws, and you're good to go. Now, depending on your gun, you may actually have a small adjustment plate that sits just on the end of the screw here. Now I'm going to install my Dean's connector here. Make sure you have a soldering iron, some solder, and you already have your heat shrink here to do everything else with. Now keep in mind, when you are installing this, you do need to strip the ends of the wires and tin them. Just put enough solder on there so it can be easily heated up in a moment. After that, make sure you have your heat shrink on the wire before you actually put the connector on. Otherwise, you don't really have a way of putting heat shrink over it. And it's really that simple. Depending on your gun and how well everything's already set up, you'll probably have to adjust your motor height just a little bit. Now you can install your mag catch, your stock, and your handguard as needed so you can finish your gun. So, what do you guys think about the Modify Torus Complete Gearbox? I think it does pretty well. It's a decent price for what you get. They're supposed to be extremely durable, and it's really not that difficult to install. You can check them out at your local retailer, or go check out jagprecision.com. They are a distributor, so go get your local retailer to carry these things. They are not half bad. Thanks for watching. I'm Prowler Chief from Airsoft Team Kilo23. Big thanks to Brian from Echo One for letting you check this gearbox out. Take it easy, guys.